Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's workshop. I'm Sean Spivey, Chief of Staff and Senior Counsel for the FCC's Broadband Data Task Force. The Broadband Data Collection, or BDC, is a new framework for collecting information on broadband service availability, born out of the Broadband Data Act, passed by Congress in March of 2020. As most of you participating today know well, the current Form 477 broadband deployment data the FCC has historically collected has overstated broadband availability, particularly on tribal lands. The new BDC program will collect location-level information on fixed broadband service availability throughout the country. And for the first time, this data will be subject to review by governmental entities, individual consumers, and other third parties, as well as verification by the FCC. The broadband maps the FCC will create from this new data will play a critical role in the efforts of tribes and other governmental entities to ensure that essential broadband services are made available throughout the country, and the broadband infrastructure funding is carefully targeted to the areas most in need. Mapping broadband in tribal areas and deploying broadband infrastructure over tribal lands both present unique challenges. Timely and accurate data from tribal service providers is therefore of paramount importance, and we thank you for participating in today's workshop. We will begin today's program with a few short presentations on the basic goals and framework for reporting availability data into the BDC, including key differences between the new system and the old Form 477 system, as well as tips for generating fixed availability data and legal requirements and other issues to be aware of when preparing your availability filing. But we also want to make sure we hear from you, so we reserve time for questions after the presentations. Please email your questions to bdcwebinar@fcc.gov or use the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. We will do our best to answer as many of your questions as time allows. If we are unable to answer a question today, you may submit your question via the FCC's online BDC Help Center at fcc.gov/broadbanddata/help. You can find additional information and resources in the BDC Help Center, as well as a detailed user guide for the BDC system. The website will be regularly updated with additional resources and FAQs, and I would encourage you to visit the website often throughout this process. We are honored to be joined today by Danae Wilson. Danae currently works as Assistant Director for Internet Access within the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy. Danae is a member of the Nez Perce Tribe and previously served as manager of the Nez Perce Tribe's Department of Technology Services. She's also a former co-chair of the FCC's Native Nations Communications Task Force and member of the FCC's Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. I'm now going to turn it over to Danae for some brief remarks.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Danae Wilson. I'm with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP. I'm a member of the Nez Perce Tribe. I live on and work from the Nez Perce homelands. OSTP is comprised of 6 teams led by Dr. Alondra Nelson. The technology team, my team, is led by Alexander McGillivray. The Interagency Tribal High-Speed Internet Working Group is cooperatively sharing information for deployment of high-speed internet on tribal lands. The interagency groups meet regularly to share data on agency activities, funding, outreach, and technical assistance. The intent is to ensure that a joint effort is being made to disperse information over many platforms. The FCC, along with other federal agencies like the National Telecommunication and Information Administration, have done a significant amount of outreach, making efforts to ensure all Native nations are aware of how critical the broadband data collection is. I cannot stress enough the importance of the deadline for the broadband data collection. The FCC, Office of Native Affairs and Policy, and the Wireless Bureau have worked diligently to provide technical assistance and tutorials. You will learn today about the Wireless Bureau's office hours, the ability to schedule time for one-on-one assistance. The Bureau and their team are ready and able to provide the information or assistance you need. I was in your shoes. I sat where you are. I understand the stress you're under to meet the deadline. That seems unachievable. Today, I'm here to tell you that you can get it done, and the FCC is here to help you achieve that deadline. The takeaway actions I have for you, of course, I always have actions. My pleading last comment is that you take advantage of the help being offered today, schedule your one-on-ones, and send in your questions. and that you reach out to any of your contacts, providing the information you gained today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danae. We really appreciate you being here today. And we appreciate everyone in today's webinar taking time to participate in this session. We hope that it will help filers finalize their submissions into the inaugural BDC filing window, which opened on June 30th and will close on September 1st. I'd also like to take this time to thank the FCC's Office of Native Affairs and Policy for facilitating this workshop and for all of their hard work and important work on the broadband data collection. With that, let's start our first presentation. I'm going to now turn it over to Ken Lynch, Chief of the Industry Analysis Division of the Office of Economics and Analytics here at the FCC for the first presentation. Over to you, Ken.
Cool, thanks, Sean. Appreciate that. So I just wanted to bump through a few points about the broadband data collection that maybe could answer some of the questions that you might have in the back of your mind or in front of mind at this point. And then, I'm just going to go through these quickly and hopefully we can then get to your questions that you might want to ask. So I've been with the FCC since 2001 and have spent a lot of that time working on the 477 data collection. And I'm sure that some of you all have been filing that form for a while too. And just sort of to differentiate the BDC from that data collection, especially in context of availability versus deployment, as we sort of called it in 477. Just so you know, the BDC is really the FCC's implementation of the Broadband Data Act, right? And our part of it, like the part of the people, the people on this call, our focus is to manage the data and get good data. So we're trying to help out here in that way, right? So it's not lost on us that the BDC is a heavier lift than the 477. It's way more granular. Conceptually, it's analogous, right? Except instead of looking at things at the census block level, now we're going location by location, right? And that makes things considerably more complicated in a couple really important ways. And one is that, of course, I think for the 2020 census, there are about 8.2 million census blocks, which sounds like a big number until you realize that there are over 114 million locations in the broadband serviceable location fabric that's being used for the FCC's BDC data collection. So it's a lot more data in that sense. Plus, one thing that's required for us to do as part of this, and it's in the Act, is that there's a challenge process or sort of kind of a corrections process, if you would, that sits on top of the fabric, right? And so one thing that Congress asked us to do was to allow folks to submit changes, corrections to the fabric, right? So while that's a good thing, right, and it's going to make the data better, it adds complexity, right? Because the fabric is going to be changing every round, right? So whereas for census blocks or census tracts that you may be familiar with from 477, those changed once every decennial census. Now we're going to be moving the fabric. The fabric will shift around, probably not hugely, but somewhat between rounds. So that's one thing to notice. In terms of interacting with the BDC system, it's good to go to the BDC help site and pull up the templates that are listed there. If you just go and Google BDC help and then type templates in the search bar, you'll get to the list of templates that we have set up there. The system is set up so that it checks for the format of the files on ingest. And so having those templates in place is really important. If you haven't gotten going already, there's no time like the present to get going, and you don't need to have all your data together, all set, all your ducks in a row to get into the system and get going. It's a good idea to get in there as soon as possible and just familiarize yourself with it if you haven't done so already. If you have partially completed data sets, go ahead and try to upload them, see if they're valid, look for any mistakes. It's good to get on that sooner rather than later. It's also good to, if you have like a huge amount of points to upload. I don't know if that'll be so much the case for folks on this call. You can split up your file into smaller pieces. It just makes it a little bit more manageable. On the GIS front, like, for example, if you have a map that's very sort of large and complicated, splitting that up into smaller files can also help. I mean, at least that's been my experience in 477, where small files seem to, or the system seems to be better at ingesting a number of small files than one like enormous one. On the subject of polygons and maps and locations, in the BDC system, if you initiate a filing, in each filing, the fixed broadband availability section will accept either polygons to express your location area or your coverage area, or a list of locations, a tabular file listing all your locations. It won't accept both. So if you're in a position where you have sort of two kind of technologies over which you're offering service, and you really wanted to express the availability of one in terms of a list of locations and the availability of the other in terms of a polygon or a map, you would have to do two separate filings. And that's not impossible. It's just two separate filings, right? And you'd have to have a different FRN for that, right? Another reason to sort of get into the system early is that one thing the BDC system does that the 477 system did not do is it executes cross-checks in the data at submission time. So those of you familiar with 477 process know that a month or two after, maybe 6 weeks after the deadline, we would run some checks over the data and look for anomalous stuff and send you an email perhaps that said, we saw this and this, and you need to, tell us why this makes sense. That process is kind of front loaded in the BDC. And so when you go to submit the filing, it will execute those cross checks and say to you, perhaps if it finds something anomalous or something it wants to ask about, we'll say, well, we noticed that, for example, a number of your connections have, let's say, faster upstream bandwidth than downstream bandwidth. And this is kind of unusual. Can you explain why this is, that type of thing? So it does that right before you're getting ready to submit the filing. So again, good to get going early on that one. And I know it's hard to say that now since it's not all that early anymore, but still, in the end, I just want to stress the idea that, our mission here is to try to help you get the data in the door. And that's kind of what we're focused on. So please reach out to the Help Center if you need something in terms of getting your data in the door. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kirk. Kirk, take it away.
Thanks, Ken. So I'm Kirk Berge, work in the FCC's Wireline Competition Bureau. Have worked on mapping as long as I've been at the FCC, which is about 16 or 17 years with Ken and his colleagues during that almost that entire time, and have been working on the BDC implementation most recently. So I wanted to talk about a couple of issues from a legal standpoint that may warrant some special attention. There have been some questions on some of these, and there are some nuances here that I think it's helpful to highlight. So for the broadband data collection introduced a new requirement in the filing, which is that both on the fixed and the mobile side, the filer has to provide an engineering certification as to the information that's submitted. And as originally adopted in their report and order, the commission provided two avenues for that. One was to have a certified professional engineer make that certification, or a corporate engineering officer that has a bachelor's science bachelor of science in engineering degree and has direct knowledge of and responsibility for the filer's network design and construction. So those are the two options that were originally adopted. There was some concern raised in the record that would be difficult for many filers to accomplish. And so the FCC waived that requirement to introduce two new additional avenues that can be taken. So in addition to what is in the report and order, that is a certified professional engineer or a corporate engineering officer with familiarity with the system. Filers may also get certification from an otherwise qualified engineer, which means one of two things. It's either someone with a bachelor's or postgraduate degree in electrical engineering, electronic technology, or a similar technical discipline, and at least 7 years of relevant experience in broadband network design or performance, or an individual that has specialized training relevant to broadband network engineering and design, deployment, or performance, and at least 10 years of relevant experience in broadband network engineering, design, or performance. So the two new options essentially are a bachelor's or postgraduate degree in electrical engineering plus 7 years of relevant experience, or specialized training plus 10 years of relevant experience in broadband network engineering, design, or performance. So there's now, as I say, there were 2 options originally, and there are now 4 ways that you can accomplish the certification. I'll just talk briefly about maximum buffer requirements. This is a feature of the fixed broadband service reporting, and it essentially it establishes an outer limit in distance beyond which you are not permitted to report a location as served, and it varies by the technology, but it essentially is an effort to ensure quality control, that filers aren't overstating their service areas or their capabilities. It varies, as I said, by technology. These are maximum distances associated with the particular technologies. They're not safe harbors, so you can't just use the buffers to file. They just have to be something to keep in mind as you're filing in connection with your network architecture and the features of it that dictate what these distances can be. Questions have come up about what to report for availability if locations seem to be missing or there are other inaccuracies in the fabric. And so as a general matter, you may only report to the fabric as it exists at the time of the filing. So it's not possible to report locations that don't show up on the fabric that are applicable to a given filing, or to make corrections in that filing round. So if you're seeing things on the fabric that you don't see as correct, what you should do is, if you're able to reasonably link what you're seeing on the fabric with what you know to be the case on the ground, that is, you are aware of a location that has maybe a short or small variation in its lat-long coordinates, and you're confident that that's the your understanding of the location is the one that's correlates into the fabric, then you can report those locations. You can't report locations that don't show up in the fabric. The answer there is you may file, and we encourage you to file, challenges to the fabric after the filing, the immediate filing, to come in and file a challenge to either, depending on what the circumstances are, to introduce a new location or to change features of a location as reflected in the fabric. But each collection, each series of the collection must be reported to the fabric as it exists at that time. Reporting legacy services at a location. So if there's a location that is receiving legacy service that is not offered in the marketplace, but is being delivered in the marketplace. So in other words, if it's being provided to a location, but if someone were to ask for that service, they couldn't get it going forward. Those services should be reported in the collection. So even though it's not prospectively available, the fact that it's being delivered as of the date of the filing, they should be reflected as available. Confidentiality. So this, as with just about anything associated with the new collection, we're trying to be very transparent. That comes from mandates in the Broadband Data Act, which underlie the collection. And so almost anything you file is subject to being published. And that in particular, the availability data, that's absolutely public data. If a location is reported as being available to a provider, then that's what the map will reflect. In addition, filers must give us, in filing their information, an explanation of their methodology how they determine that the locations they're identifying as available are in fact available. And so that explanation will be a part of what we publish. So there are certain very narrow exceptions and certain instances where it's possible to seek confidential treatment, but that's going to be a pretty high bar to get to, given the emphasis on transparency, so that the collection and the maps can be as useful as possible to all the stakeholders that will be accessing it. I think that's what I had in terms of questions to flag up front. Happy to take further questions as we go along. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks, Kurt. So we're now going to begin the Q&A portion of the program. We're going to start with some previously submitted questions and then move on to live questions that are incoming through the Q&A box. As a reminder, you can submit those questions using that Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, or you can email bdcwebinar@fcc.gov if you'd prefer. And we're going to get through as many of the questions as we can today. Ken, let me start with you. A question: can we file multiple list of location files in the BDC system?
Yeah, sure. It's fine. So basically what ends up happening is that, if you have a file that represents sort of a chunk of your locations, and then another file that has another chunk of your locations that you can provide service to via the standard installation and interval, et cetera, right? You can upload them into the system separately, and it sort of automatically will concatenate those. The only thing to look out for there is to make sure that you use the template, the BDC, the fixed availability template for those. One thing that the BDC does that 477 did not do is that it expects to have a header row on separated value files that are uploaded. And not only does it expect the row, but it expects it to be formatted correctly, right? So you have to spell the names correctly, and so use the template. It will save you a lot of trouble. But yeah, it will concatenate all those uploads together, and you can even look at them on the map in the interface and see where they if they are showing up on the map where you expect them to be.
Great. Another question for you: if I upload a polygon in the system and then download the list of fabric locations, can I modify those locations and then submit that, or am I locked into using all the locations that were kind of produced by the system when I submitted my polygon?
Yeah. So this is actually a really important feature of the BDC system. And I'll say that again, this is an important feature. You can upload a polygon into the system, right? And it will intersect that polygon with the broadband serviceable location fabric. And then you can download the locations, right? And when I say intersect, right, what that means is that if you uploaded a polygon of some kind of shape into the system, and then what it will do is overlay that polygon with the fabric, and then it will allow you to then download the list of locations that are inside that polygon, that are contained within it, right? So that's a good thing to know, because then you can take that list and pick through it and change it and edit it however you'd like. Like if there are locations that fall within the polygon you're pretty sure you can't serve, you can take those out, right? And then if you wanted to, you can actually upload the edited list of locations that you received from going through this process into the BDC system, delete the original polygon, and simply file your availability or express your availability as a list of locations rather than a polygon, right? And if you read through the data specification, you'll see that there are certain advantages to doing it that way. I mean, in the end, right, for fixed availability service, the map that's kind of ultimately going to be shown here is going to show locations and not the polygons. And so for the purposes of turning this all into like one map, it's going to be a list of locations. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah. Another question for you. What should we do if our addresses that we have don't find an exact match in the fabric file that we get from CostQuest? The fabric seems to be missing some addresses, as opposed to just having a lack of matches that result from differences in spelling or kind of, directional type things.
Yeah, I mean, creating the fabric is a really complicated process, and especially so in more rural areas. And so this is a heavy lift. And also addresses are incredibly difficult to work with. Right, you can imagine that there are lots of places where locations simply don't really have addresses in the United States. Well, not lots, but there are some. There are, and again, especially more in rural areas and territorial areas too. So it's not easy to work with the address numbers all the time. It's often pretty helpful actually to go sort of back to the zip code. Like in some cases, like you'll see that there are kind of partial addresses where maybe the town name is different. The zip code can be really helpful in that sense, where it's more uniform than the town and the spelling of the town. There are also multiple names for different streets, right? Like a street will have a name in that area, but it'll also have a number, and probably both of those would work as far as like putting them on an envelope and getting something there, right? So yeah, it is tricky. There are a couple of videos on the website that talk about some possible ways to work around this. And I would strongly urge you to take a look at those. I mean, and the other thing to do also is to sort of put your points on the map. If you have, there are some free GIS software options out there that allow you to do this pretty easily. And again, I don't expect everyone on the call to kind of learn this right now, but it's something that we can also help you with if we have a call or something they'll get to. So again, encourage you to look at the tutorial videos and also to reach out to the Help Center on this.
Thanks, Ken. That's an important flag. Yeah, if the resources available on the website don't have an answer, you can submit a request for help, create a trouble ticket on the Help Center, and we can provide a direct response to questions that you have. Another question for you, Ken. I tried to upload location information from the fabric into the system, but I received many location ID number, and is invalid errors. Can you explain why that may be happening?
So those of you who have access to fabric files already, again, so when, I don't know if you all know this already, but if you get access to your fabric data, it's typically kind of denominated by counties, right? So you'll get from CostQuest, the county or counties that you've asked for, should be anyway. And so it should be way more locations than you really need, and actually way more in two ways, right? The active file, like there are two files that you'll get in the zip file, right? And there'll be an active file that contains, and what that means is just sort of all the active locations that are in CostQuest inventory at that moment that are in those counties. And so the idea being that, you are, as an ISP, able to provide service to some subset of those, right? And then there's a secondary file which has or contains alternative versions of the address, if there are any, for each location, right? So the thing about the fabric is it's thinking of, every sort of point in it is a location, it's a structure, right? What the active file includes, and this is sort of the second part of it, why it's kind of overly inclusive, is it includes a bunch of locations that are not actually broadband serviceable locations. And so if you look at the data, there's a field in the fabric active file called BSL_flag, right? And that is the field. It's a Boolean, right? It's a true or false. If that's true, then that location is actually broadband serviceable according to the fabric. If it's false, it's not. So if that flag is false, that location ID will not be accepted by the system, right? And the logic for sort of keeping them in there was that to the extent that people are taking the fabric data and sort of mapping it, having the sort of non-BSLs in the data was thought to be a good thing because it would provide sort of frame of reference, right? In actuality, it might have been better to leave them out, but this is the way it is right now. So, so make sure that when you upload your data, you filter out all of the BSL flag equals false locations and just keep the ones where BSL flag is equal to true.
Thanks, Ken. Kirk, a couple of questions for you. The first one, if I'm a fixed wireless service provider and I submit fixed broadband coverage as a location list, do I need to file fixed broadband supporting data?
Yep, thank you. Sorry about that. No, you do not, except to the extent that so you've got two options. You can, as a terrestrial fixed wireless provider, you can create a shapefile using the propagation model as specified in our rules, so which sets out certain parameters that you have to follow to create your propagation model, to create the shapefile, which identifies locations in the fabric. You can also give us, as Ken was just discussing, you can give us a list of locations that meet the standard for availability as specified by our rules. If you do the shapefile with the propagation model, you have to give us details about assumptions you made with regard to your propagation model, subject to the overall constraints of the creation of the propagation model. If you give us just a list of locations, you have to tell us how you generated that list. You have to give us enough detail so we can understand what your methodology is, but you don't have to provide the full set of details that are required when you do a propagation model.
Thanks, Kirk. Another question about the maximum buffer sizes that were adopted for wireline deployments and some of the exceptions, in particular, the exception for areas that have been identified as receiving USF or other government support. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about what the buffers are and some of the exceptions to the buffers?
Yeah, so the buffers are maximums beyond which you may not report locations unless you meet certain exceptions. One exception is if you either are currently providing service outside of the buffer distance to a provider or customer, or if you have formerly provided one, such that you know that you could do so within the availability standards, that is the 10 business days, without costs associated with extending the network. So those are two exceptions: current customer or former customer, if you can meet the availability standard. You also should identify those locations that may be beyond the buffers if you are as a provider receiving or have received universal service support to provide broadband service. It can also include other federal, state, or local obligations to make service available in the area, and you've begun or have finished providing service in that area. You can go past the buffers to that extent, to the extent you've got locations that are funded and there's a commitment to provide in that to that location, then you can exceed the buffer distance. You can also seek a waiver of the buffers if you've got other circumstances that would make it reasonable for you to claim a location outside of the buffers as served or available.
Thanks, Kirk.
I would just add, one thing to that, right? I mean, the buffers are, it's important to take them into consideration, and when you're doing your filing, and I'm not trying to go around the waivers or anything like that, but the thing about the data collection is that if you can provide service to a location within the standard interval, et cetera, right, then you should list it, right? It should be one of your locations. If you can't, then don't. And that's true no matter what.
Yeah, no, that's good general rule of practice.
I'm trying to simplify it a little bit. Yeah.
Ken, a question for you about some of the licensing of the Fabric data. What is the time frame on getting access to the CostQuest Fabric data for a tribe now that that may have been unaware of this requirement, but is emailing to start the process of getting access?
So any ISPs, and CostQuest has turned this around pretty quickly. I would encourage anybody who has an ISP at this point that hasn't reached out to CostQuest to do it as soon as you possibly can. Get your counties listed, send them out to CostQuest. It should only take a couple of days to turn this around. They're going to be a little more crunched right now given the timing, but it's usually pretty quick.
Thanks, Ken. Let's see, I may try and take this next question. How does the FCC intend to help smaller tribes without capacity to complete submissions by the deadline? We understand that the submission process can be complex. How does the FCC plan to make the process simpler or easier? How can we get more information about the BDC in general? So a few things here. As we mentioned a couple of times on the webinar, we will make technical assistance available to any ISP that is required to file under the rules, and that starts with participation in this webinar, but it also goes to some of the knowledge-based articles and web tutorial videos that we've made available online, all the way up to submitting a request for assistance on the help center. And that will kind of get you into, either a response from, customer support staff all the way up to, expert GIS people who can help actually, help you format your data and answer questions around, gathering your data and getting it uploaded into the system. So we are making a variety of tools available, so that you are not alone in this process. I also want to flag that if our Office of Native Affairs and Policy has been sending out email blasts kind of periodically starting, I believe, going back to last December when we held our first tribal technical assistance workshop, but definitely throughout the whole of this year. If you are not on that distribution list, I think you can email Sairi, or who's the acting chief of ONAP, or you can email native@fcc.gov, and you can get on that distribution list for updates so that you are getting information about resources as they're being published and being made available. But definitely reach out to us, ask questions. We are here to help guide you through this process of getting your data into the system. So yeah, I think the first step is just taking part in today's workshop, but it's by no means the last step, as we understand. Danae, I may just kind of bring you in here and make sure, that there aren't any other kind of resources or, tips or tricks or guidance that maybe I should be thinking about, or we should be thinking about, or that we can share with folks on the webinar in terms of kind of getting ready to submit this data.
Sure. So if you're having problems with rural addressing and street addresses, if they don't exist on your tribal lands, try to make sure and flag those even in a Google map and send them to the tech team so that they can help identify. Those would not show up in a typical census block because there is no address, right? So they wouldn't show up in a census block. And many of those individuals who don't have a physical address are using a PO box. So please make sure to do your pin mark in Google Maps even and send that to the tech team and let them know that those are houses that you're providing service to and that those residents actually exist, even if there isn't a street name or a house address. So those will be really important things to take forward. The team will be able to help you identify how to correctly include those in your data.
Thanks, Danae. I mean, I think, yeah, really important as ISPs are kind of working through the process of reporting their broadband availability, you all are going to be uniquely positioned to help inform improvements to the fabric data as well. So to the extent, there are locations that are not included in the fabric that you provide service to, if you are able to kind of keep up with that and provide that back as part of our fabric challenge process, that will help feed into improvements to the fabric data for the next data collection, which I know is probably a lot to think about right now, but this is going to be a biannual collection. So we're going to start this process again when the next window opens on December 31st of this year. So I think, keeping track of things that you're seeing can help refine and improve the data over time, which is exactly how this process was designed in when Congress passed the Broadband Data Act and as we built kind of the overall system for collecting the data. Great. Let's see, Kirk, a question to you. Is the 10-day requirement, I think that this is the 10 days for a standard broadband installation. Is that just 10 days period, or is it 10 days assuming perfect weather and permits in place and healthy crews and equipment in the warehouse? How should people be thinking about what that standard broadband installation means?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's 10 business days. I think, you raise issues sort of like unintended or unforeseen circumstances. We understand that that's going to happen from time to time. I think what you want to be doing is using your best good faith judgment about what your capabilities would be as of the date on which you're filing, or as of the date for which you are filing. So I don't think we would expect you to see, everything that could possibly happen, but you should be trying to reach a good faith representation of what's possible on that day.
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah, and I think just important to reinforce that I think the expectation there is that that's not really designed to allow for things like acquiring permits and trenching cable and things like that is. When we think of standard broadband installation, I think what we're really kind of contemplating is a service technician going out and turning up service at a location, or maybe, delivery of customer premises equipment, like shipping out an antenna or something like that. It's meant to be kind of just, getting the person turned on to the network and connected to the network, not really expansion of network footprint.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna try and take another one, which is always dangerous. But let's see. We filled out and signed a license agreement with CostQuest to get the fabric data. How long after this step does it usually take to get access to the fabric data file? That's a great question. So after the license agreement is signed, you typically get a copy of your fabric data file within 3 business days. They will also prepare a preliminary data file, and you usually receive a link to access that through the help desk system within 2 business days. But yeah, so there is a little bit of a lead time from the time that you execute the agreement to when the file is prepared, and that's just because they have to run it by county and that sort of thing. And as Ken was saying, we're in a little bit of a crunch time right now, but it should be 3 business days. If you haven't received it by then I would say follow up with CostQuest using the address that they've provided, which I believe is NBF, which stands for National Broadband Fabric. So NBF support@costquest.com. Ken, a question for you. Please confirm that even though a fiber wholesaler, for example, a public utility district, reports their deployment data, the fiber retail service provider still has to report all the same BSLs.
Yes. Yeah. So and it's sorry, we can spend the rest of the call on this one if you want to. So there's all possible different kinds of arrangements under the sun here, right? But oftentimes it's the case that, at least in the conversations I've had with people, that the public utility district, can't actually have any end user customers of its own. And they basically, in a lot of cases, they sort of build out the network, but it's not really lit, right? It's incumbent upon the ISPs that are riding on that network to come in and bring their own equipment to bear and provide the access to the internet to the end user location, right? So in that sense, right, the ISP riding on the PUD's network is the provider, right? They've become the facilities-based provider, and therefore they're on the hook to file, again, traditionally in 477, and now also in BDC, right? However, if it's the case that the PUD itself has no end user customers, right, because subscribership is gating, they don't need to file, right? Sometimes the PUD does have a customer, sometimes they don't. It just depends on the situation. It depends on how that's set up from the legal perspective in whatever state we're talking about. But it could be that the PUD is not filing at all, in which case we would have no idea, right, of the extent of that PUD's network. So it's important for the ISPs that are riding on network to file. If 20 ISPs are riding on the same PUD's network and they file 20 of the same footprint, that's something that we need to deal with on our end, and we can have the capability of doing that. So yeah, file it.
Thanks, Ken. This next question I'm going to try and answer, but I'm going to look to Kirk for an assist. Let's see. What are the resolution requirements for clutter data resolution for fixed wireless availability? We're using the best data that we have access to, but we're still limited to about 30 meters resolution. So on the mobile side, for mobile wireless, I think the maximum clutter resolution allowed for is 100 meters. So 30 meters would be well within the requirement for the mobile wireless side. For fixed wireless, I'm not sure that we have adopted a requirement for maximum clutter value size, but Kirk, can you correct me if I'm mistaken?
No, that's correct. It's not specified.
Yeah. So 30 meters should, I think, is pretty good. So but good question. Thank you for asking it. Ken, another question for you. We have a parent company that's an RLEC with 2 affiliates. We report our broadband data on the 477 at one of the affiliates. However, that affiliate does not have a 499 filer ID. How should we go about completing the BDC filing for provider ID?
So I'm not totally sure how to take this one, but let me spitball a little bit here. So the provider ID and the 499 ID are 2 separate things, right? So any entity or legal entity out there that has this providing voice telephony should be filing a 499A and have a 499 filer ID, and that whole data collection goes into Universal Service and is administered by by USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company. And so if you're a voice provider and you don't have that, you should have that, and you need to go to USAC for that. Traditionally, that involves fulfilling the registration requirement associated with that form, which is, I think it was used to be filing pages like 1, 2, 3, and 8 of the form. I'm not sure if right now they have like some way you can do that online. I think you can. So that's 499 ID. Again, like if you're an ISP that doesn't offer voice, this is not you, right? However, if you're if your filing in BDC incorporates, let's say, ISP operations and voice telephone operations, and there's a 499 ID associated with that, you can list that one in there. If you're just an ISP, you can hit the flag that says I don't have a 499 filer ID and just file that way, and just skip that whole part of it. But if you need any additional guidance with that, you should get in touch with the help center. The other thing about this is the provider ID, right? So the provider ID is really more for it's in the template for these uploads because of the challenge process and sort of things that are going to happen in the future. But ISPs don't really need to have their provider ID to file their own availability data, right? You can put any number in there, any number you want in there, or you can leave that field blank, right? You don't need to have your own provider ID. But if you do want to find it, you can look on the help desk website and they're listed on there. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Ken. If that didn't answer your question, you can try and repost in the Q&A box, or you can submit a request at fcc.gov/broadbanddata/help. Ken, another question for you. This person is looking at the data from CostQuest and they're trying to do address matching, and they're finding that only about 35% match on their addresses from the data they receive from CostQuest. I think you've talked a little bit about address matching and how that can be kind of a messy endeavor, but maybe just, yeah. Any tips for how what people can do to kind of approach that?
This is tricky and it is a little bit messy. Again, the idea for me, the idea of putting the data on the map, I think is really helpful to, just visualizing it, I think would really help. And I think that the tutorial videos can help you walk through this a bit. But if you want to stick sort of with trying to match the addresses, which again is hard, there is a tutorial video that talks about sort of doing fuzzy matching on the address data. And it's actually a kind of a cool plugin for Excel that does this. So that might be something that we're trying to have already. Again, if you can't get there, this is something to reach out to the Help Center for.
Thanks, Ken. Kirk, a question for you, if you're able to answer it. Is there an option to have a certifying engineer, one certifying engineer for a mobile broadband filing, and then another engineer for a fixed broadband availability filing?
That can't be done within one filing. When it's a single filing, you can only have one certifying engineer. But you may, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, you may file your fixed and mobile as separate filings, each with its own certifying engineer. Do I have that right, Ken? Okay. Yeah, it's obviously more work, but if you're looking to do it that way, that's an option.
That is an option. Yep.
Great, thanks to you both. So we got a question about what should we do if a location that has not been identified as a broadband serviceable location eventually becomes a broadband serviceable location, or if a location that is marked in the fabric as not being a BSL should be a BSL. The best way for this to be addressed is through the fabric challenge process. So again, like we were saying, if you're going through and you're seeing locations that are either missing from the fabric data or that are included in the fabric data but are not identified as a broadband serviceable location, then those are both subjects of or categories of challenges that can be submitted in the fabric challenge process. So, kind of keep up with that, and there will be an opportunity to submit those bulk fabric challenges shortly after the filing window closes after September 1st. And we've already released kind of a data specification document for how those bulk fabric challenges have to be formatted for upload into the system. But when you're doing that, just make sure that you are familiar with guidance that the FCC has released previously. In particular, in addition to just all, prior reports and orders, there was a public notice that was issued on July 1st that kind of spelled out the methodology that the commission used and that CostQuest used for identifying broadband serviceable locations. And so, to the extent you are planning to submit challenges to the Fabric data, you'll need to make sure that the challenges kind of fit within the parameters that were set out in that public notice. Ken, a question for you. So a couple of issues that someone is seeing in the Fabric data. The first, and I'm going to use first about 3 times here, is First Street spelled out versus First Street with a numerical in front of it. And then the second that the person is seeing are multiple dwelling unit addresses where there are more than one address for the building. How should people be thinking about kind of unit counts associated with multiple dwelling units and the address issue in terms of kind of different spellings or things for addresses? Right.
And so there will be a lot of locations, I think, in the Fabric, well, maybe not a lot, but anyway, I haven't really done the numbers, but in the Fabric that have, a primary and secondary address. And again, those secondary addresses are in the secondary file that, the non-active file that you get as part of the package, right? Those are in there just to sort of provide an additional way to, or another way to search for or match to the addresses. As far as the unit counts go, I'm not surprised that there might be some unit counts that are not accurate. This is, again, the generation of the Fabric is a heavy lift. There's going to be issues in there. It's part of the, and Congress, I think, had the foresight to see that and kind of put this sort of challenge process on top. Again, I think challenge process is a bit of a misnomer here. It's really more of a correction process. It's still, these are, as Sean said before, things that are worth putting a pin in and hanging on to, so that when the Fabric challenge process sort of kicks off, there's, you can submit those corrections and help improve Fabric.
Thanks, Ken. So we only have 1 minute left before we hit 4 o'clock. I'm going to try and get in one more question because I think it's an important one, and then maybe open it up to if there are any other questions that we may have missed or didn't get to that Ken or Kirk, you or Danae, that you may want to get to. But so this question is, what was the information used if rural Alaska homes don't have house numbers? So I think this is, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, I just want to share that, the Fabric data was created based on a model that CostQuest created that is supported by literally hundreds and if not thousands of individual data points, things like tax assessor data, parcel data, satellite imagery, aerial imagery, all sorts of things that kind of feed into an algorithmic process that CostQuest used to identify with a percentage of confidence whether a particular structure is a broadband serviceable location. So it doesn't rely, addresses are one of the data elements that fed into that, but the Fabric by no means relied solely or exclusively or even predominantly on addresses. So in areas where we know addresses are a problem, like tribal areas, that was not kind of a key input for identifying broadband serviceable locations. And so, if there aren't house numbers for particular locations, then we don't think that's going to be necessarily an obstacle in all cases. And that's another reason why we don't really encourage people to rely on address matching as a way to kind of try and do this. The Fabric includes, geo-coordinates for each broadband serviceable location. And so that should be able to give you a pinpoint location of where a structure can be found in the event that there isn't an address associated with that location. And finally, we know when submitting a Fabric challenge, there is the capabilities to submit a challenge for a location that does not have an address associated with it. That is an option in the data specifications. So I just, I know that there are concerns around addresses and how that could present an obstacle, but I think the way that the Fabric data was created does account for that. So with that, I know we're 1 minute over. Maybe let me ask Kurt, Ken, and Danae, were there any questions that we didn't get to that you think we really need to try and squeeze in?
I think I would just emphasize that the point's been made a number of times, but the important idea here is to, in each filing, to report to the Fabric, whether you're filing a shapefile or a list of locations, what you're doing is identifying locations in the Fabric as it exists at the time of the filing that you are asserting can meet the standard for having service available at that location. So I think it's important just ultimately to think of it in those terms, that we're trying to find which locations in the Fabric meet that standard.
That's a good point. I mean, again, the Fabric is not perfect, and we're expecting that, but it kind of is what it is for the course of that particular filing round. So.
And I think just as my closing remarks, if tribes have not yet filed for their license to CostQuest, when you're submitting your request for CostQuest, please make sure you're asking for the tribal license, because some of the legal issues that tribes will face are removed already, and that barrier is taken away. So make sure you're asking for the tribal license when you are requesting access to CostQuest.
Yeah, thanks, Danae. And I think I believe we have a process in place now where if the entity is identified as a tribal entity in the system, when they fill out their entity information page, like by default, they should be getting that tribal license. But absolutely just belt and suspenders, make sure when you're in contact with CostQuest, mention that you are a tribal entity, and but they should already know that and be by default getting that version of the license, because yeah, it does have provisions that recognize tribal sovereignty and things like that in the document. So that's a very helpful flag. Well, thank you, everyone. That brings to a close the Q&A session, which I hope was very helpful and informative. As a reminder, you can find a variety of technical assistance materials, including tutorial videos, knowledge-based articles, frequently asked questions, and other resources by visiting fcc.gov/broadbanddata/help. And questions about how to use the system and the BDC filing requirements may be submitted by using the Submit a Request button on that webpage. Thank you all again for taking the time to participate in this workshop and for your efforts to engage with the BDC. We look forward to your participation. Thanks again and have a good afternoon.